What if I told you?
What if I told you?
What if I told you
that there are a group of black Indians
that created the largest haven in the U.S. for escaped slaves?
In the 1700s. What if I told you?
What if I told you that there was a group of black Indians that led the largest slave revolt in U.S. history?
What if I told you that there were a group of blacks in the United States
that forced their own emancipation
before the Civil War?
What if I told you?
What if I told you that there were a group of black Indians
that led a mass exodus along the Trail of Tears and then right out of the United States?
What if I told you?
What if I told you?
What if I told you that this is the true story of the Black Seminoles, and you've likely never heard it before?
I never learned about them, and they were never in my history books.
This is a story about betrayal, distrust, backstabbing, and about a people that have been, for some reason, lost to history. This is about the Black Seminoles, the Black Indians,
and their long, remarkable journey to freedom.
Can't do this no more, Abigail. I won't.
What do you mean, Abraham? You're scaring me.
We've been slaves long enough now. I won't spend another day under the whip of these crackers.
Escape? Where can we go? You know they'll kill us. They'll
Florida.
kill us dead.
Florida. I heard them say it's free there. It's a chance, Abigail.
Florida? It's so far, Abraham. It's dangerous.
I'll kill anybody that gets in our way. Staying here is death. We deserve better. You deserve better. We deserve a life free of these crackers.
Live free or die trying.
Live free, die trying.
Them, along with several other enslaved Africans, made their way down to Spanish Florida. They fought slavers, bounty hunters, and many were recaptured and lost their lives along the way. But finally, several made it to freedom, at least for a while, in the swamplands of Spanish Florida.
During the same time period, there were several civilized indigenous populations scattered across these lands.
The term civilized tribes was applied to the major Native American tribes that took the bad medicine of the white man. They were classified as civilized because they had adopted the attributes of European culture, becoming Christians, sending their children off to re-education institutions, market participation, intermarriage with white Americans, and,
wait for it,
chattel slavery practices, including the purchase of enslaved Africans. Little did they know that the cotton reservations that they had would become cotton plantations after they were stolen and seized by the same white people they were emulating. Guys, sorry for the shaky video in advance, but we're on our way to a town called Mosquis, and this is another town here in Mexico. But this town is the closest town we could get to Nacimientos, which is the town that a tribe, actually the Seminoles from the USA, kind of came over here to seek refuge during times of slavery. They are warrior people, they are a fierce people, there are some survivors, and it's not a whole lot of them there. So we're hoping that we're able to make some contact.
We've been exploring stories of how Black Africans made it here, and it's a variety of ways, but this community that we're going to is a completely different story and history of how they made it here.
So we're just praying for some favor as we go so we can show you guys, and so we can learn about the real deal here in Mexico and Black people and their migration here. So see y'all there.
Yes, my name is Wendy Goodell. I am a Black Seminole, and more specifically, I'm a descendant of the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, which were the group of men that joined the military and fought for the military in the U.S. from 1870 to 1914. So I grew up in Brackettville around that history.
We had not found out about the Black Underground Railroad that led into Mexico. We had never heard about that before.
Yeah, not many people have.
But whoa, like, what you know about this Underground Railroad? What's going on? Black indigenous people moving to Mexico. What is this?
I know, it's It's a lot. That's what I always tell people. It's a lot of story. You know, the way that our elders began the story was that in the late 1600s, around 1680s into the early 1690s, there were what would become known as the Gullahs, but they were enslaved Africans living in the Low Country who took it upon themselves to seek their own freedom. So instead of going north, they went south into Florida because Florida at that time was a Spanish territory, so it was not part of the formation of the U.S. at that point. It was owned by the Spanish.
In 1687, 8 men, 2 women, and a nursing child escaped from Carolina to Spanish St. Augustine and requested baptism into the true faith. Florida's governor sheltered the runaways out of Christian obligation and refused to return them when an agent from Carolina came to reclaim them. The slaves' telegraph quickly reported this outcome, and soon other runaways began arriving in St. Augustine.
Have you heard?
Florida officials repeatedly solicited Spain for guidance, and finally, on November 7th, 1693, Charles II issued a royal proclamation
giving liberty to all, the men as well as the women, so that by their example and by my liberty, others will do the same.
Ultimately, it was to establish freedom seekers who were making their way down from the Carolinas, escaping slavery. If they made it down to Spanish Florida, they could live free.
And once they got there, they found that there were already people there who were living free. There were formerly enslaved Africans, there were free blacks who were living on the land.
Van Nero's town on the Swanee River. Here on the Apalachicola River, even before the one here at Prospect Bluff, you had a settlement near Ocheesee Bluff. They established a separate one where there were several hundred maroon fighters. You had many settlements of free blacks all through Florida, particularly, late 1700s, early 1800s.
There were also Native Americans. At the same time that was happening, there was the group of Creeks who lived just north of Florida. And because of moral differences, they splintered into the Upper Creeks and Lower Creeks. And the Upper Creeks decided that they wanted to break away and go down into Florida to get away from the Lower Creeks, who were taking on more European ways of life. And one of those was to begin chattel slavery. That's where the idea of the word Seminole comes from, is that some linguists believe that it is a Creek word or a Muskogee word, and it's pronounced Seminole or Seminole. They believe it means runaway because these Creeks believed that part of their group was running away. And so it's also interesting that it fits for what would become the Black Seminoles, because they were essentially running away as well. They formed their own villages but were interacting with the Seminoles, so they would become known as the Black Seminoles.
The African and indigenous people lived and worked closely together. And in time, they came to view themselves as a part of the same loosely organized tribe, cultivating a mutual respect of each other's cultures. The Africans adopted a lot of the Indian garb, and the Indians adopted African agriculture, music, and folklore. And they lived this way for over 100 years, raising generations of children in freedom. As Florida continued to be a haven for Black freedom, this didn't set too well with antebellum Georgia. They shared a border, and contentions were high. At this point, there was a lot of retaliation going on. The U.S. military launched raids, tried to steal slaves, steal cattle, and encroach on this Spanish land.
The United States felt that the existence of the community served as something of a beacon of freedom for slaves from Georgia and the Carolinas, or even the Creek Nation, to slip away from bondage and come down here seeking freedom in Florida.
In the spring of 1818, the U.S. government launched their attack.
As soon as the U.S. military was dispatched at the orders of Andrew $20 Jackson, this marked the beginning of the First Seminole War.
The 1818 Battle of Swanee is again recorded by the U.S. military. The people referred to as Black Warriors held off the U.S. troops.
The Seminoles, known as the Red Sticks in that area, and the Black Seminoles held their ground and held up their contract with the Spanish to defend the border.
They ultimately fell back, and the village was destroyed. Fell back to was the Manitou River, Tampa Bay, Angola.
At the conclusion of the First Seminole War, the Spanish sold Florida to the Americans for $5 million. This drove the Seminoles and the Black Seminoles deeper into Central Florida, deeper into the Everglades. It was here that the two bands grew closer, and it was also here that birthed two legendary leaders, Osceola for the Seminoles and John Horse, aka Abraham, to lead the Black Seminoles.
So the First Seminole War began between 1860 and 1870 when General Andrew Jackson went in and started a war.
I read somewhere that he was trying to recapture black formerly enslaved. They weren't even formerly enslaved at this period. They were never even
They were generations removed. Yeah, they were generations removed. And Andrew Jackson, he was the only president who ever ran on the idea of committing genocide. So he promised that he would wipe out, all Native Americans and return formerly enslaved Africans to their owners.